Good day to you as I'm traveling to a conference to make a presentation on the transformation of college radio. And while I'm on this way, I want to ask you a question, and that is, have you heard the news? And I bet right now you're leaning in, or you're pausing, or you're at least lending an ear, because that saying invites us to find out what is new. That is, after all, the basis of what is news, something that is new. And so as we approach today's class, we're going to approach it a little bit differently in terms of this instructor video. We're going to take a look at just the concepts and then have you apply those concepts in your quiz and discussion question without me covering details of each country. And so when we ask what is new, we are also taking a look at, if you want to go back to the metaphor of the tree, we're taking a look at the special leaves on a tree. We're taking a look at those leaves that help us see whether the tree is overall healthy or whether it is in decline. That's what news helps us do. And so when we take a look at, for example, a newspaper such as USA Today, we can look at the lead stories on the front page as this paper saying, this is the health of our country right now. So we have Memphis, then and now. It's a story about the legacy of Martin Luther King and an anniversary of his assassination, if you want to call it that. And we have a story on Wall Street's cheers turned to jeers. And so that's a story that is communicating an opinion that things are not being perceived as going well with the stock market. And then we have troops might be sent to guard the border. And so right there we have a kind of story that's emerging about the health of our country from those three stories. Similarly, if we take a look at CNN,
meanwhile, President Trump this morning weighed in, giving Mexico some credit dealing with the issue of the caravan of immigrants coming from Central America through Mexico to the United States. Here's what he wrote. The caravan is largely broken up thanks to the strong immigration laws of Mexico and their willingness to use them so as to not cause a giant scene at our border. Because of the Trump administration's actions, border crossings are still at an unacceptable 46-year low. Stop drugs. But I want to point you to that last part of his tweet. The 46-year low is still true. It is still true that border crossings are at a low of almost 5 decades. But the administration...
So there we have CNN. I can just tell you personally on that particular story, when I was driving down to Philadelphia yesterday, I listened to NPR radio, not my favorite radio, but it's interesting to listen to sometimes for me. And there was a really in-depth story also on this caravan of immigrants coming in from various parts of Central and South America, war-torn areas, and they are poor people looking for a place to live. That they are seeking refuge from the violent conditions that exist in their country. And I can tell you, I've been to Mexico many times, and I also have a personal attachment to that particular place that they're headed to, Puebla, because I've been to that city, and I'm following this story, and it brings up some thoughts from myself about the Mexican people that also feed into the way that I perceive news. And so I'm telling you this because it is starting to lead into the concepts that I want to talk about for today, because we can look at three sort of equilibriums between three almost diametrically opposed concepts. So the first two are bias versus objectivity. And that's what I'm talking about here, that I have an experience in Mexico. You may have an experience. You may have Latino heritage in you. You may have somebody who lives next to somebody who's from Puerto Rico. And that may feed into the way that you perceive news on Mexican people somehow. So it's an example of how we all have biases, and there really is no such thing as unbiased news either. Because after all, news is created by human beings who are biased. Nonetheless, we can look at that as a kind of a relative scale. We can say, is the news more biased? Is it openly biased? Is it saying, hey, we are going to say this is our opinion and we want to let you know that? Or is it saying, no, these are the facts, and then there's an opinion inside of it? You can decide for yourself. You can look at Fox News, for example. You can look at MSNBC, two opposites in terms of a political spectrum, bias versus objectivity. And then we go to a second dimension of news, and that second dimension of news is whether news is entertainment oriented or serious oriented. Think about the news that you listen to. Is it heavily influenced by what's going on in Hollywood, or what's going on in the music industry, or what's going on in the film industry, or what's going on in the gaming industry, or what's going on with celebrities? Is it generally in that area, which would be, or sports as well? When you watch TV, do you watch the Ellen DeGeneres show, for example? Do you watch Big Bang Theory? Is the news that you get, is it more entertainment oriented or is it more serious? Are you on CNN? Are you on NPR? Do you watch Meet the Press? Do you read Time Magazine? Do you go on CNN.com? Do you look at BBC? Do you seek out news that is more serious? That is a second diametrically opposed equilibrium that's going on there, is serious news versus entertainment news. And then that leads us to the last area of news, and that is breadth versus depth. So breadth is when you cover a lot of stories, but not very deeply. So you maybe just cover the headlines like radio news does. Radio news is typically 4 to 5 minutes long. And so each story is just basically headlines and then a couple sentences afterwards explaining what's going on. That's a lot of breadth. You can cover a lot of stories in 1 minute. You'd be surprised, or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but you don't know very much about what's going on. And so that speaks to depth. And depth is achieved by running consecutive stories, like in a newspaper, and not just doing a story on this caravan of immigrants today and then leaving it behind, but tomorrow returning to it, doing another front page story on the USA Today's front page. That's achieving depth. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to have multiple stories in the same area. So that CNN story right now that we were watching continues on, and in the next broadcast, the next cycles through to the next hour, and they have a new host and new guest, and they're also talking about this story. That is achieving depth. So there you have it. Those are the three main concepts that have to do with news reporting. And now I'm going to invite you to spend the rest of your time before we talk again looking at news. Go to any news that you want. You can go to Yahoo News, you can go to news on Twitter, you can watch news on television, you can listen to news in your car. Just try to find some news to help enliven your thought process when it comes to studying this subject, the leaves on the tree that tells the health of a media system. Have a great day.